Okay, we're going to get started with our second Fireside Chat. It's going to be with Lauren Riley, the Chief Sustainability Officer of United Airlines. And in conversation with her will be one of my colleagues, Professor Kerrie Carfagno, who is an associate teaching professor at McDonough School of Business, but also has a joint appointment in the Earth Commons Institute on campus. And the reason for that is she's our new program director for the degree that you've heard about, the new Master of Science in Environment and Sustainability Management. Sorry, I keep saying new. It's in its second year now. So but we're very excited to have her with us. And this degree especially is quite unique because it's one of the very few that actually blends both science and business to not just make the business case for sustainability, but figure out how to do it, as you heard in the first Fireside Chat. And so she's going to be in conversation with Lauren Riley, who works for United Airlines and is their Chief Sustainability Officer. And we're looking forward to hearing about how United Airlines is addressing climate change and what kind of decarbonization strategies they're focusing on. So with that, I'll welcome both of them onto stage. So begin the chat, please.
Lauren, thank you so much for being here and for taking time to talk to all of us. I'm excited I get to be up here with you and already just even geeking out in the green room. So as Chief Sustainability Officer, there are a lot of things that will keep you busy, but with all the challenges, all the massive change, as well as the opportunities, what makes the airline industry specifically, are those specific challenges that really keep you busy?
Well, let me start by saying hello and thrilled to be here. Actually, really, really important to have candid conversations with folks like you in this room because you're going to be real, true problem solvers as we transition to a low-carbon economy. So my thank you for all the hard work that is yet to come. It's very important that you lean into the challenge that's before all of us. So aviation is interesting. It's a very different industry. I think there are maybe a half dozen industries that are designated as what's called hard to abate. What that means is that we don't have the solutions today commercially available at scale to really make a difference in the amount of emissions we put into the atmosphere. So the good news is that we know that. The bad news is that we're not transitioning fast enough. We're responsible for about 3% of greenhouse gases worldwide, which sounds small. It's not. United's footprint in any given year is about 42 million metric tons, and we're just one airline of several hundred. So it's very, very significant. And in addition to that, we are looking at a future whereby other sectors are starting to decarbonize. So that's a good news story. We want to see that happen. Think about EVs and ground transportation. That's what we want to see happening. But for me, in the seat I'm sitting in, that means that there's going to be an even bigger target on my back because our proportion of contributions for transportation emissions is going to grow. And arguably, some are saying with the demand we're seeing coming out of the pandemic and some of the growth that's underway, it could be in the double digits. So not great. I'm at 42 million metric tons today. What could I look like by decade end? So those are some of the challenges that we're looking at today. You know, we have the solutions. We understand how we need to get there. And I know we'll talk a lot about that today, but it's a very, very nascent market. We're talking about solutions that are really in R&D phase when we need literally commercial scale in a global operation. And so realizing that in a successful way that we can sort of bring into an industry that has heavy infrastructure, has different regulations in every country. We fly to 85 different countries. I also oversee environmental compliance for those of you science folks out there. There's a whole lot of complexity in a system that is somewhat patchwork when it comes to regulations and policy, and that's emerging right now as well with emissions management. And so those are some of the challenges that we look at on a day-to-day basis. How do you grow a marketplace? How do you make sure that the policies are complementary with the amount of change at the pace you need that change to happen? How do you make sure that you're educating consumers about what does it mean to travel and to travel sustainably? And why aren't you seeing change right now? One of the hardest messages that I have to convey is change right now is actually, not seeing change right now is actually okay. Because if you want me to reduce my greenhouse gases right now, you're going to be asking me to undertake behaviors and decisions that are actually not in the best interest of the climate. And I'm happy to dive into that in a moment when we start talking about alternative fuels and some of these solutions that we really need to start investing in. And so there is a plethora of challenges out there, but that means that there are also a multitude of opportunities. And that's really the exciting thing that's undergoing right now in aviation. Sustainability is really a conversation these days around innovation. And I'm excited to dive into that some more too.
Oh. Well, thank you. You shared with us about the industry, and it is a hard-to-abate industry, but you're already the leader in many, many ways. And part of that is your net zero promise by 2050. I'd love to hear what you're working on, what gets there, and I think that kind of ties into what you already foreshadowed. It was just hearing the tech and also the innovation and the opportunity that's coming with that promise of net zero.
So we do have a commitment to net zero 2050. In fact, the entire global aviation industry has the same commitment. I'm part of the Global Association of CSOs that actually looks at how do we make sure that we're signaling and then acting on a direction that really supports some of the goals of the Paris Accord. For those of you in the room, because I know you're like me, you're sort of the sustainability nerds out there, aviation is actually not under the umbrella of the Paris Accord. We're outside of it because you can't actually you cannot actually align our emissions in sort of a country basis. So the NDCs don't actually allow you to understand if you fly from New York City to London, how do you account for those emissions? So there's a lot of discussion in that capacity right now. I just completely lost my train of thought. What were we talking about?
Net zero at United.
Oh, net zero, yeah, okay. So there's a lot of collaboration across all the airlines to actually do the right thing. What you'll see, and where United is really leaned in to take a leadership role, is in how we get there. Our commitment to net zero is without relying on carbon offsets. That was our pledge from the beginning. This is a couple years old. That was really, really important to us for the reasons I started talking about, because we cannot afford to be distracted and call success simply by transacting a financial transaction outside of our operations that doesn't cause me or anyone in our executive team to make a different decision about how we run the business. And so when we were pledging net zero, we were really clear that we have to put our heads down, our time, money, resources, focused on growing those solutions that are actually going to decarbonize aviation. And we've rolled out a whole host of different initiatives to help us get there. I heard the previous speaker talk about, really the challenges around financing, and that's absolutely correct. Today, our biggest challenge right now is how do we finance this transition that's ahead of us? You can start paying for it today, and you'll hear that referred to largely as the green premium associated with these sustainable alternatives, or you can look at financing for the long term, which is really where you look at de-risking some of these net new investments that are coming online to produce some of these solutions that we're going to need over time.
So as you talk about that, and you talk about United's goal, but also their ability to do pre-competitive cooperation or collaboration and looking at jet fuel, what are some of the different strategies that you've considered or that you have basically decided aren't a viable option?
So, we are a heavy asset industry. So the jets that we fly in the sky, they're up there for 30 years. So you think about how do you decarbonize when you have an asset that is not going to change for 30 years? That's really important for us to think about in the context of working with the existing infrastructure, working with the existing aircraft, working with the existing airports to enable the industry to really transition. There are primarily two different levers that we look at to decarbonize aviation. One is largely looking at the operation itself. How do we use less fuel? So in the use less fuel capacity, there's new aircraft. So every new aircraft that you introduce into the fleet and you replace the old aircraft, it's 20 to 25% more fuel efficient. So you convert that to emissions, that's material, that is really material. How do you do operational efficiencies? So let's think single engine taxiing from the gate to the runway, so we're not burning two engines at the same time. Think about ground power unit charge instead of auxiliary. That means you're not burning the fuel in the jet engine while you're sitting on the gate waiting for everyone to board. Those things make differences for sure. And then, of course, we're looking at some of these alternative technologies like electric and hydrogen. those are fun. Those will have a real impact when it comes to short distance traveling. I don't think here in the US that they're actually going to be for long distance travel, think, transatlantic, but they're really important in terms of sort of demonstrating a different mode of transportation. So there's the use less side of the equation, and then there's the reduce through the fuel that we burn. 98% of my greenhouse gas emissions on an annual basis are from fuel burn. So when you talk about climate in an airline, and you're not talking about fuel, there's some kind of disconnect there. So we really do spend a lot of time talking about what's called sustainable aviation fuels, which are largely derived by renewable or waste byproduct. And it creates jet fuel, chemically the same as the existing jet fuel that we pump out of the ground. And you can actually put it on today's airplanes. So again, back to my comment around using the infrastructure, these birds fly for 30 years, we need to make sure that we're working within the constraints of the business. And sustainable aviation fuels is really where we're focusing our efforts to really build a marketplace that just doesn't exist at this moment in time.
So what are the challenges and successes of developing it with aviation fuel that's sustainable? For example, you're a leader, you've put $100 million into this and basically backed it up and then got support from the industry for another $100 million. But you came in not only as a leader, but putting this significant amount of money in that says, yes, this is important, and then got the support to get in there. Are the challenges technological? Are the challenges cooperative? Like where are the things that slow you down and the things that get you excited?
Yeah, oh gosh, it's so complicated. So again, it all comes back to financing this transition. So you're all business folks in this room. In any given day, when you talk about sustainable aviation fuels, I essentially have 3 business cases I'm trying to solve for. First is, how do I get more production? Our biggest challenge in the marketplace around production right now is that refiners make more money making renewable diesel than they make selling sustainable aviation fuel. It's the same process. They go a little bit further to make aviation fuel. Smaller market, lower margins. Why would I do that and have the CapEx requirement to actually be able to take it to an aviation fuel? I'm going to stop at RD, make a ton of money. There's great demand out there. I'm good. So the production side is really challenging. Second is the consumption side. So United, how do you get me to buy more? SAF is 2 to 4 times the cost of conventional jet fuel. Our margins are about 4%. I walked into our CFO's office, this was before the pandemic, so take it with a grain of salt. But I said, let's go out and buy 10 million gallons of sustainable aviation fuel, 2 to 4 times the cost of conventional jet. My CFO said, please don't come back here and say that again because that's a joke, right? And so he made me leave his office with the tail between my legs and said, okay, go figure out how you finance this. So it's just not economical for airlines like United to actually purchase that fuel today. And then when you talk about the third of those business cases, okay, reduce your climate impact. All right, so sustainable aviation fuel is about $200 per metric ton reduction. So $200. Or I can go buy a carbon offset for about 10. You want me to go green? Which one makes sense? I've got a limited budget. So we're solving for all 3 of those at the same time, which is why some of these sort of financing initiatives are really, really important. We have 2 primary programs at United that are really important. One is called the Eco Skies Alliance. This is really a partnership with our corporate travelers and our cargo travelers. These are the folks that are willing to pay that premium today, so they're willing to pay that differential so that they can actually report on their greenhouse gas inventory reduction of their Scope 3 emissions. So for them, they want to be able to say with integrity and pride that they're backing with their dollars the right climate solutions for aviation. AB, you received a package on your front door that is carbon neutral shipping. That's because of United in partnership with some of these freight forwarders. If you have an internship next summer and you need to travel and you travel on sustainable aviation fuel through a book and claim model, that is in part because of United Airlines, among others. So that's a program. Eco Skies Alliance is about 40 or 50 corporate customers today and enabled us to buy about 10 million gallons of sustainable aviation fuel this year, which is a big deal. There's only 2 producers in the world. But you're able to demonstrate progress right now. The next one that you were talking about, though, is this Sustainable Flight Fund. what we found is that you can take, I don't know, $5-10 million today, pump it into the market, pay the premium, and you're able to reduce your emissions. Or you can take $5-10 million in the market and actually put it towards investment in startups that are looking to build solutions that either capture carbon, make fuel, help build electrolyzers, all of these technologies that we need to enable a transition to renewable power, green hydrogen, alternative fuels. And you can actually take that $10 million and do 3 investments and make a big difference to get a technology off the ground. Oh, and by the way, we align those with fuel agreements of the future so that we can actually have line of sight to having fuel in our supply. And so there's 2 different models depending on the risk tolerance of the company that we're collaborating with. For the fund, the Sustainable Flight Fund, we have about 10 investment partners right now. It's $200 million. Really, this was kind of a beta test for us. And it's been wildly successful. In fact, it's been super cool to watch because not only is this led by United Airlines, but we've had JetBlue, Hawaiian Airlines, and Air Canada all come in and basically kind of shrug their shoulders and say, United, you know what you're doing, so please do it for us. I didn't say that publicly, but that's really what's happening.
I didn't hear.
Yeah, no, truly, which is kind of cool because we cannot do this alone. We cannot do this alone. And so we need a variety of folks across the value chain that understand the challenges, that are willing to put dollars on the table, invest in these early stage startups that we believe can actually transform the way we fly and pull out those emissions, and we're doing it together.
Being a leader personally and then as well as your organization as being a leader, how do you get other people on board? What does it look like, that process of, hey, have I got an idea for you? I mean, you clearly funded what you wanted to do with the CFO, and he said, you know, I'm a little worried about this. I love just the thought process of how do you say, all right, here's the big audacious goal, here's how we're gonna get there.
Yeah, no, that's a tricky one. What we're all facing right now, and those of you in this room too will be facing, is that business doesn't think carbon. That's the disconnect that's happening right now. We think money, we think profits, we think, Wall Street. What is happening is that Wall Street and regulators are starting to think carbon. And that's been really interesting to sort of experience that evolution. It's a new currency, essentially, that's being sort of infused into business. I was saying backstage that, 3-4 years ago, environmental department and, Lauren and her team were this cute little project team in isolation of the business. And we really were, we need to slap a green label on something, go talk to Lauren. I mean, that was kind of how it transpired, which was really pathetic. But now, here we are 4 years later, and sustainability is business strategy. Mm-hmm. It is. And anybody that doesn't see that is not opening their eyes to what the world is going to look like beyond the next decade, where carbon will be measured, and carbon will be part of our greenhouse gases at large, will be part of the way that we enable KPIs for business success. Mm-hmm. We're not there yet, but it's coming. And that's a really big deal. And so I've had great partnerships with the finance department. Certainly our ventures team, that's a great partnership with ours, where we're responsible for the environmental diligence. So how does this actually reduce emissions in the atmosphere? They do the business deal, we figure it out together, high five, and go forward. Mm-hmm. So that's been a fun collaboration. Communications is crucial. So any of you out there that are real creative and you like the communications marketing side, really important right now that we communicate with integrity. How do we be transparent? How do we make sure that customers understand what you're doing, why you're doing it, and what's not being done, and why it's not being done? Government affairs. So those of you that are interested in sort of public affairs and government relations, huge. And I'm happy to go into the IRA and all those different policy, because that is making the market happen, frankly. That's a huge sort of collaboration across the business. And I can go on and on. Of course, legal. Can't do anything without legal. But my point here is that sustainability is everywhere. And sustainability is owned by everyone. And in fact, at United, maybe 2 years ago, we started embedding ESG at large. So think diversity, equity, and inclusion meets sustainability into our bonus structure. So for all of our executives, a portion of our bonus is determined by whether or not we hit our ESG goals. And I get to write the sustainability side, which is great for me because it's kind of like my birthday party and I get to tell all the leaders what to do. But, it sort of creates that behavior change where you say, listen, you're accountable to the entire business to see this goal. I negotiate with them on the goal. It's not that I just tell them. But that is one way that has really been tactically successful in realizing the behavior change that we want to see across the business.
So I'm going to guess that's part of why you got the Airline Strategy Awards 2022 for ESG. You really have been a leader, as I said, within the company, but also within the industry. As you look at these things, you also talked in an article that I read about a signal to the market that it's time to invest in aviation fuel and sustainable aviation fuel.
Yep.
What does that signal look like? We're customers, we fly. I would be floored if someone here hasn't been on United at some point. What kind of signals can we provide, as well as what kind of signals do you want, obviously, from investments, from banking, from different areas of the industry?
Yeah, it's kind of this weird position we're in because we're the demand side of the equation. So we say, we want more alternative fuels. Give us more SAF. It's called SAF. And so really it becomes this question around how do we influence across the value chain to send signals everywhere. I will say, the Inflation Reduction Act was a massive market signal, hugely beneficial for aviation, which frankly never had attention before. This is the first time we're recognized with a tax credit in the Inflation Reduction Act. And in fact, depending on what kind of pathway you take to produce your alternative fuels, it could be a sustainable aviation fuel tax credit. There is a carbon capture tax credit. There is a green hydrogen tax credit. There are state tax credits. You can stack all this stuff up and suddenly the economics look a lot better. So policy plays a very, very crucial role in some of that signaling. Demand side, so I do collaborate with my colleagues across all the other airlines around sending a demand signal. One example of that is we're part of this initiative under the State Department called the First Movers Coalition. And so it's airlines, it's fuel producers, it is corporate travelers that are all coming together and saying, yes, everyone is committing to a target volume of sustainable aviation fuels, but we actually want the good stuff. We want the market not just to settle at a 50% reduction, we want the market to move forward and actually find those fuels that can do an 85% reduction. And we'll commit to buying it in 2030, so go build it. We definitely need the financing out there. That is a huge challenge of ours, is how do we de-risk some of these early stage investments that are required to really demonstrate the viability of the fuels. The valley of death is very real. And we haven't cracked the nut to figure out how do you sort of align the financial institution's risk tolerance to some of these early stage startups. And literally, these are folks that are in the DOE lab with a beaker and trying to figure out how do you produce using net new processes to come up with an alternative fuel that's got a really impressive CI. All of this requires money, and we have not yet figured that one out. But the government is stepping forward. The Department of Energy Loan Program Office is really being ambitious. The Bioenergy Technology Office is being really ambitious. Of course, our collaboration with Department of Transportation and the FAA. So there's a lot of focus on, okay, how do we infuse money at the right places at the right time? That sort of swell hasn't quite happened yet, but we're getting there. I've got EV envy because I like to, seeing how that market has really evolved so quickly because money has gone to the right places in the market at the right time. So we're behind them, but we're going to catch up. It's going to be fine.
Wonderful. I think this is great. What also impresses me is not only are you doing all this, but you're also doing carbon removal. So it's like, hold my beer, hold on. I'm involved in all these things over here. I'm a leader. I've got another 100 million to go with my 100 million, and that you're also doing carbon removal. Can you share a little bit about that progress?
Well, and so what I'll pause and just reflect on is that it's not a one-size-fits-all when you become a sustainability professional. You can do whatever you want with this job. So, truly. So carbon removal is going to play a role in an economy that is low carbon, full stop. No matter what industry you're in, doesn't matter. Everyone's going to be talking carbon removal at some point in time. So of course there's point source capture, so industrial processes pull the carbon, it's usually pure stream and you can do something with it. And then there's direct air capture, which is really like industrial fans that sort of are vacuums to pull CO2 out of the atmosphere. What we're looking at is really a world in which you take those technologies and you bolt them on to fuel production. You need to have a relationship between the end product that we need to decarbonize and that technology. Otherwise, it's just a glorified carbon offset, carbon removal credit. And those are fine. I don't have any problem with that because we're all going to need them. But for an industry like ours, we need to actually have the end product. And so we're looking at ways where we can invest in technologies. We've got about 3 or 4 that really do look at carbon capture, and then you can sort of embed it into the industrial operation to make these alternative fuels. There is also a pathway of alternative fuels called power to liquid. This is my sort of favorite of all of them, if I'm allowed to say that. Don't tell my investors.
You love them all
yeah,
the same.
I love everybody.
Okay.
But this one is really kind of cool because this is really around pulling the CO2 to the atmosphere using renewable power, and you make jet fuel. You're done. I mean, what? So we have an unlimited supply of CO2. One of the biggest challenges of alternative fuels is the feedstock supply. We are sort of in this massive competition with other markets that are also looking to move to these alternative fuels. So how do I get enough woody biomass? How do I source enough of this feedstock that is usually biomass-based feedstock when RD and others really want to suck up that feedstock and use it for their own industry? CO2 is one of those rare feedstocks that we have plenty of, and we have the technology to do it, but it is lab. So right now it's in the laboratory. It is not scaled remotely. The economics are really rough, but there is line of sight to getting there. And so if I were to crystal ball the next 15 years, I think really the future of flying is going to be this power to liquid. It's also called e-fuels in Europe, but really exciting technology. It's going to take 15 years.
So you say it's going to take 15 years. Is there anything that shortens that? I mean, we've got students, particularly in the ESM program, but students throughout our program that are the business side as well as the science side, trying to, how do we tighten some of these windows if we put you in charge of everything?
Yeah, and I've got to say, I just learned about this master's program, and I think it's amazing, and I'm super jealous that I didn't have it when I was a student.
Me too.
I know, it's so cool. So if I were queen for the day, we need incentives. I mean, we need incentives. Markets respond to incentives. And right now, we're not quite there. So what we've heard with the Inflation Reduction Act is that really big focus on driving alternative fuels. That desire by early stage technologists to start go into the aviation space, that's happening. What we're not seeing is that shift to scale. And what that means for us is it's great if there is a technology out there that can churn out 10 million gallons of fuel in a year. I need 5 billion. I do. Not aviation, I do. And so 10 million isn't material in the context of my decarbonization pathway. And so really a lot of the discussion right now is where are the integrated energy companies? Where's oil and gas? How can we access their infrastructure? How can we convert their existing infrastructure to start producing? There's a lot of limitations in sort of how those refineries are configured and whatnot. But we need to shift to some proportion of these scaled incumbents producing alternative fuels. And they're under a tremendous amount of pressure. It will come. But, frankly, we don't price carbon today. We subsidize oil and gas. And we're not really speaking in the context of an economy that operates in the context of greenhouse gas emissions. Those things will change. And I think once those tipping points come, we will see this massive acceleration. And what my job is to make sure the basket of solutions is ready to go. And so the minute that sort of, those policy decisions sort of shift in recognizing that we're evolving, we can go. And that's really what I sort of spend my days focused on.
Wonderful. With that, we talked a little bit backstage, and even it's already been touched on here, but collaboration. Mm-hmm. How much of that is you getting people on board, or are you just enabling people that already want to do something and are trying to figure out a direction? Because, you've been, like I said, we've talked about it as a leader in the industry, but some of that is people that also want to do it and are trying to find their path, as well as that challenge of people that aren't really sure it's a priority as much as other things. What does that look like, those conversations?
Yeah, so collaboration is key everywhere. Not just within United, and I kind of gave an example of some of the departments I work with on a regular basis, not even just with the customers. So I gave examples of 2 corporate programs that we have through the fund and through this Eco Skies Alliance. Our leisure travelers, so just your typical traveler, they're also starting to engage, which is actually really mind-blowing to me because I'm talking about fuel and gases and science and stuff that people don't want to think about when they're going on vacation. And now they're finally curious. One of the campaigns that we released earlier this year, and I encourage all of you to go out on YouTube and check it out, is a collaboration with Sesame Street. And we have now Oscar the Grouch as our new chief trash officer. And you can take trash and you can turn it into jet fuel, and it's sustainable and low carbon. But it made the topic approachable, and it made it light, and it made it fun, and everybody loves Sesame Place. And you think about all the joy that you or your kids or maybe your mom and dad had thinking about Sesame Place and Sesame Street and all of the different opportunities there. But it's really kind of taking down the barrier that existed before about this super wonky, sometimes depressing topic of climate change. So collaboration with consumers is really important. I cannot emphasize enough policy. So I live here in DC. That's for a purpose, because I spend a lot of time talking to members of the administration about how policy is going to accelerate or decelerate the change that we are seeing in the industry. My peers. So I was also mentioning earlier that I talk to my peers across all the other airlines probably 4 or 5 times a week. We are actively talking about where we need to lean in and where we need to redirect. How do we talk about some of the sort of life cycle analysis changes that are happening with greenhouse gas protocol? How do we talk about some of the book and claim evolution that's happening, where people kind of want to separate scope 1 from 3 when it comes to sustainable aviation fuels? And I'm getting a little nerdy here, but like all of these things are really important to enable the market to scale. It's all about how do we enable the market to scale. One last example I'll give you is that we made a commitment with the US government, so Department of Transportation, EPA, DOE, there's another one in there, Ag, to commit to about 10% of our fuel supply being sustainable aviation fuel by 2030. And so within that, we have a lot of work to do to grow production, to get it to the airports. I can't even tell you how difficult the logistics are with sustainable aviation fuel compared to just piping fossil-based jet fuel. Working with them to realize sort of the amount of investment that needs to go into these net new factories. We're talking, an increase of several hundred by 2030. I think we need about 350 factories, and right now we've got 2 producers. So there's a lot of hurdles now. That's commercial scale production. There's a lot more that are in demonstration scale. But without collaboration, there's no shot in getting this done, because this is not a single company challenge. This is really about, frankly, a global economy shifting.
Yeah, and for the students out there, that's why we put you in group projects. So yeah, you can learn how to do this. So with this, I could keep asking questions, but I want to turn it over to the audience and have some Q&A.
Sure.
So if we can manage that, I'm going to work with the lights to see if we have people coming up to the mics. If you want to just go ahead and introduce yourself, ask your question.
Hi, my name is Kevin Townsend. Thanks for your candor, and also thanks for your optimism. Having been in sustainability for about 16 years, you just need a little bit of optimism, or a lot of it, and some blind faith from time to time too. But I'm going to fight my nature a bit and just ask you a simple question. What keeps you up at night?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. To be totally honest, I'm very nervous about what's happening right now in the ESG space. So this regulation of what was once a very voluntary space is causing a discussion around liability instead of ambition, which is not a bad thing. I mean, we all have to stand by our numbers. Our scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, our entire inventory has been in our 10K for 2 years, and that's because we believe it's the right thing to do. So I'm not afraid of that. What I am afraid is the sort of unintended consequence and then sudden reluctance to move in a way that was kind of happening until the SEC and CSRD and some of these other folks started raising their hands. That remains to be seen. I don't know that we'll stop, because I think the opportunity to make money right now in sort of this transition to low carbon is probably bigger than the fear, but I have witnessed that directly. And I do hope that this is just a moment in time before the rule comes out from the SEC, and then we kind of move on.
Thank you, Nicholas De Alejo, Climate CapEx. So I've had some fun in the project finance space and SAF. So what do you think is the ideal role for strategics? Because if you go to the SAF Congress, no financial buyer wants to touch this stuff. Obviously, RNG's a better trade. So you look at the shipping industry, Maersk, they have 7 off-takers and their green methanol, they've invested in one. Is that the ideal model, or is that the only model that's practical because you can't put 5-10 million in every single technology? So like, if you had to design a framework as an ESG and sustainability expert, what would be the ideal model of what's the support from an equity or capital stack of the strategic into that has the off-taker or whatever the case is?
Yeah, you should join our fund. No, actually, I'm kind of not joking, because here's what's happening right now is that some of these producers, they're basically saying, we can't bank the risk associated with our investment unless you give us a 10-year offtake agreement. Sign a fuel supply agreement for 10 years. Airlines don't do that. We will never do that. That is not a viable solution. It's not going to happen. And so we need to break this expectation that there's sort of this take or leave it sort of approach to this offtake and fuel supply. That is not something that we're willing to sort of hedge and pre-purchase. But what we can do is actually take dollars, put it towards those technologies that we think are the right ones. The unique offering that United is trying to sort of carve out for ourselves is that we are an operator. We know what works. We know where we can flex. We know where the infrastructure enables sort of an acceleration of sort of different solutions to enable that to come to market. So it's not really just an ROI, view of sort of investing in these different solutions. It's actually a practical application. Will it actually work, and then scale? You need to figure out how to get that insight so that you become successful and confident in where you're putting your capital. And I'm sensing that there is not that confidence yet from the financial markets and the strategics, which is why you should invest in our fund.
Thank you.
We'll have to see what we can do after this.
Hi, Jeffrey Frank, evening MBA student. I'm curious about your thoughts on electrification, specifically the pace of it, and whether it makes you excited, whether it makes you nervous, whether you're concerned that maybe the pace of progress there has a risk of undercutting some of the investments or sustainable aviation fuel horizon that you might be looking at.
Yeah, so I did evening MBA, and hats off to you. That's a hard one. But stay the course. So electric, I'll say electric and hydrogen, because they're sort of two sides of the coin. They're fun. They're really interesting technologies. They're going to make a difference getting from DC to New York. So, I need to get up there to go to Climate Week next week. I'm going to take a 50-seater electric aircraft. It will have a low carbon footprint, and everyone feels good about it, right? It will not get me to London. The battery will be so big that we will not be able to take off from the runway. I mean, literally, that's where the technology is right now. Same thing goes with hydrogen. I mean, moving hydrogen around, it's not that hydrogen doesn't work, it's the transporting of hydrogen as a fuel. That's really the complicating part. We have not gotten signals yet that there's willingness to pay for the infrastructure associated with hydrogen. But that being said, for our regionals, for our short distance travel, electric will absolutely play a material role. You think about that in the context of my full greenhouse gas inventory, it's not going to be that significant. I'm talking about 5%. So sustainable aviation fuels, that dense liquid-based fuel for the mainline operations is absolutely crucial.
Cool. All right, we have one final question or student, and then we're going to have to wrap up at that point. So last question.
Hi, my name is Harsh Patel. I'm part of the ESM master's program. So piggybacking actually off of the electrification of mid-ranged regional flights, right? There's startups like Heart Aerospace that do the ES30 that is promising and it makes things more profitable. But how do you put in orders to make sure that Boeing and Airbus are trying to make sense of hybridization and electrification of long-term, long-range planes, I guess?
Yeah, so we've invested in Heart, good company. I definitely stand by, and we have an order for their aircraft. So demand signal, we've sent it, we will buy it, they need to produce it. The biggest barrier for us is actually getting the infrastructure at the airport to charge. So if you don't have the green grid, or if you have the grid but it's not green, and do you have the grid at all? So there's a bunch of sort of dependencies in there to actually make this thing work. Boeing and Airbus, the way I would characterize certainly Boeing's strategy is they're watching, they're looking at these technologies, and then they're going to go eat them up and bring them in. I mean, they've done that. I think Whisk is one of their recent ones where they really took a massive equity investment in this vertical takeoff and landing that's electric. Great technology. I totally stand by that one too. So, you know, they're in the business of building stuff and then buying engines that stick on. I don't think that will fundamentally change for them, but they're starting to sort of put their money behind some of these other projects. Boeing is also an investor in our fund. But there's a lot moving in the electric space. I would just emphasize that I think the application of it in our airspace is limited to short distance travel.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, I want to thank everyone for being here to hear this, but thanking you. I think a lot of us will say we want to make a difference in this world. It's got to feel good to know that you are and having that impact both in the industry as well as within your company. So thank you for your time being here to share all this with us.
It's been my pleasure, and good luck to all of you.
All right. Thank you.